The gun was already rising when Xiomara heard the door, and she knew she had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether Seongjin would leave this abandoned nightclub breathing or in a body bag. The emergency lighting painted everything the color of arterial spray, and 3 years of dust motes hung suspended in the air like tiny witnesses to what was about to happen. She could hear his footsteps, 8, 9, 10, each one deliberate and measured. The rhythm of a man who had killed 43 people and expected 44 to be just as easy. She didn't turn around. The Louboutins she wore clicked twice against broken tile as she shifted her weight, the sound echoing through the corpse of Seoul's nightlife boom, through air thick with mildew and her own perfume, which cost more per ounce than most people earned in a day. Dress clung to her like a second skin, and she knew how she looked in it, knew that standing here in the open was either the smartest move she'd ever made or the last mistake she'd ever get to regret. The safety clicked off behind her. Professional, controlled, exactly what she'd expected. "Seongjin," she said, and her Ugandan accent turned his name into something almost musical. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost." His voice came flat and empty, the voice of a tool that had been used so many times it had forgotten it was ever anything else. "You know my name." "I know everything about you," she said, and only then did she turn, slowly, letting him see her face in the red light, letting him understand that she wasn't afraid even though 7 laser sights bloomed across his chest and shoulders and forehead like deadly flowers. His body language didn't change, but she saw his pupils contract, saw the micro-adjustment in his stance as he recalculated every assumption he'd made about tonight. "I know Director Che hired you," she continued, stepping forward, her heels cracking against the floor like small bones breaking. "I know he's paying you 2 million won, which is frankly insulting because you're worth at least 5. I know your mother Haejin lives in Busan in apartment 412 on Dalmaji Hill, and she believes you work private security for a technology firm because that's what you told her 8 years ago when you stopped coming home with bruises you couldn't explain." His finger moved fractionally closer to the trigger, and she knew she was approaching the edge, knew she had maybe 10 more seconds before professional instinct overrode curiosity, and he just put 2 in her chest and walked away. "I know about your first kill at 16, she said, her voice dropping lower, more intimate, the tone she used when she needed someone to really hear her. A Busan politician who liked underage girls. Che called it a test of loyalty, but really it was about breaking you, about taking whatever was left of the boy whose father abandoned him and turning it into something useful. You vomited in a parking garage afterward and swore it would never get easier, that you'd never stop feeling it." "Stop talking," Seongjin said, but the flatness had cracked, something human leaking through. "I know Che found you in juvenile detention after you put your stepfather in the hospital for touching your mother," Xiomara said, and she could see it landing now, could see each piece of information hitting him like small caliber rounds. "I know he became the only father figure you ever had, that you'd die for him, that you've spent 13 years believing he saved you." She paused, let the silence breathe between them, let the weight of what she was about to say gather mass. "And I know he sent you here to die." The gun stayed level, but something changed in his eyes, some fundamental equation being recalculated behind them. "You have 2 options," Xiomara said, and her voice shifted from intimacy to command, the register she used when brokering arms deals worth more than some countries' annual GDP. "You pull that trigger, and my people turn you into paste before you hit the ground. They turn your mother's final years into a nightmare of explaining to investigators why her son brought ruin to her door. And Director Che gets exactly what he wanted, which is you dead and me inconvenienced." The laser sights hadn't wavered. Her mercenaries were good, the best her money could buy. Veterans of conflicts in 16 countries who understood that hesitation was just another word for dead. "Or," she continued, "you work for me for 6 months. I pay you 6 million won, 3 times what Che promised. You do what I say when I say it. And when your contract ends, you walk away clean with enough money to take your mother somewhere quiet. Maybe Jeju Island. Maybe that house overlooking the water she mentioned wanting in that letter you keep in your jacket pocket. The one you reread every night before you go to sleep. How do you know about the letter? He said. And it wasn't quite a question, more like an accusation wrapped in disbelief. Because knowing things is how I stay alive while people like you are sent to kill me, Xiomara replied. Because I'm very good at my job, which is why I need you. In 72 hours, 3 separate groups are going to try to put me in the ground, and I'd rather have Korea's second-best assassin watching my back than shooting at it. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Second best? Well, she said, gesturing to herself, to the room, to the fact that she was still standing and breathing and in control. I'm still here. She watched him do the math, watched probability and risk and survival instinct war across features he'd trained to show nothing. The gun was still pointed at her heart, steady as stone, but she knew she had him. Knew it the way she knew when a deal was going to close, when a buyer was going to fold, when someone was 3 seconds from doing exactly what she wanted them to do. Seongjin lowered the gun. 6 months, he said. 6 months, she agreed. And then you let me go. Then I let you go. He engaged the safety with a small click that sounded like a door closing on his entire former life, and Xiomara felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Not trust, not yet, but the outline of possibility. Her earpiece crackled with Khalon's voice, her cousin's fury barely contained behind operational professionalism, but she reached up and pulled the device free and let it fall. The laser sights vanished from Seongjin's body as her mercenaries disengaged, dissolving back into darkness like they'd never been there at all. "Welcome to the team," she said, and started walking toward the exit, her hand drifting unconsciously to the silver locket at her throat, that nervous tell she'd never quite killed, that small admission of softness she couldn't fully master. She didn't look back to see if he followed. Either he would or he wouldn't. And looking back was just another way of showing doubt, and she'd built her entire empire on the fiction that Xiomara Omondi never doubted anything. His footsteps began behind her, measured and careful, and she allowed herself the smallest smile. The penthouse was 17 floors of reinforced glass and carefully chosen furniture, the kind of space that cost more each month than most families earned in a year. Xiomara kept 3 safe houses in Seoul, 2 in Busan, 1 in Incheon, but this was her favorite, the one where she felt most in control, with clear sightlines in every direction, and a private elevator that required retinal scan, fingerprint, and a 16-digit code that changed every 6 hours. Seongjin stood in the center of her living room like a prisoner awaiting sentencing, and she watched him catalog the space. Watched his eyes move from exit to window to blind spot. Watched him build a 3-dimensional map of kill zones and defensive positions without even thinking about it. It was what she would have done, what she had done the first time she'd walked into any new space for the last 5 years. "That room is yours," she said, gesturing to a door on the left as she poured herself bourbon from a crystal decanter that had cost more than his monthly salary back when Che was paying him. "Private bathroom. Clean clothes in the closet that should fit. I had my people pull your measurements from surveillance footage. The bracelet on the table is also yours." He looked at the thin titanium band resting beside a tablet and what was clearly an expensive new phone. "Tracker," he said. "GPS, biometric monitoring, stress indicators, everything," she confirmed. Not apologizing, not softening it. "You remove it, I know. You go somewhere I haven't approved, I know. Your heart rate spikes because you're planning something stupid, I know before you've finished the thought. And if I refuse? Then you're less intelligent than I hoped, and this ends quickly and painfully, and your mother spends the rest of her life wondering why men in expensive suits keep asking her questions about her dead son." He lifted the bracelet, studied it with the detached curiosity of someone examining a trap they were about to step into anyway, then snapped it onto his left wrist. It contracted immediately, conforming to his skin with a soft mechanical whisper. "Good," Xiomara said. "Now let's discuss why you're really here." She set down the bourbon and picked up the tablet, scrolling until she found the file she wanted. The video started playing before she even turned it toward him, and she watched his face as he recognized director Che sitting in a private dining room in Itaewon, watched his expression go from carefully neutral to utterly still. "That's from 4 days ago," she said. "6 hours before you received the contract on my life." The footage showed Che meeting with a man whose face Xiomara had deliberately blurred, someone she trusted with operational intelligence, but not with identity confirmation. Their conversation was silent on the video, but she'd had it analyzed by 3 separate lip readers, had the results verified, had every word transcribed. She turned up the volume, and Che's voice filled her penthouse, slightly distorted from the directional microphone, but clear enough. "The boy's dependable, but limited, you see. If he succeeds, your client's problem disappears. If he fails, the Beko syndicate loses a useful but replaceable asset. Either outcome serves my purposes." Seongjin's throat worked, but he didn't speak. "You weren't sent to kill me," Xiomara said quietly, watching his face the way a jeweler watches for fractures in diamonds. "You were sent to die trying." "He's lying," Seongjin said, but there was no conviction in it, just the automatic response of someone whose entire foundation was crumbling. "Is he?" She pulled up another file, financial records that had taken her best hacker 3 days and considerable Bitcoin to extract. 400 million won moved from a shell company in the Caymans into Che's personal account 2 weeks ago. Same week, your name started appearing on syndicate watch lists as a potential liability. Someone paid him to eliminate you, and he was clever enough to make your death serve a dual purpose. She could see him processing it, see the architecture of his entire life being dismantled brick by brick, and part of her felt something almost like sympathy. She knew what it was like to have the ground disappear beneath you, to learn that the people you trusted most had been lying from the very beginning. "The Jung contract," she said. "The prosecutor investigating syndicate money laundering. You completed it 3 days late because you took time to verify he was actually corrupt and not just inconvenient." Che called it sentiment, called it weakness, the first crack in a perfect weapon. "How do you know about that?" "Because I make it my business to know everything about everyone who might become useful or dangerous, and you became both the moment Che pointed you at me." She set the tablet down and looked at him directly. "No performance now, no manipulation, just the truth. But there's one more thing you need to know before you decide whether to believe me." "I don't want to hear it," he said. "Yes, you do. Otherwise, you would have already tried to kill me and taken your chances with my security." She pulled up the final file, the one that had cost her the most to obtain, the one she'd almost decided not to show him because some truths were too cruel even for her purposes. "Director Che isn't just your handler, Seongjin. He's your biological father." The sound he made wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, just air being forced out of a place that had always hurt but never had a name. "You're lying," he said, and it sounded like a prayer, like he was begging her to be lying, even though he already knew she wasn't. "DNA analysis from a sample taken from his office," she said, pulling up the clinical document with its charts and percentages and irrefutable science. 99.7% probability of paternal match. "He left your mother 29 years ago when she told him she was pregnant, said he couldn't support a family, that he had ambitions bigger than Busan, and a woman and a child. Then he spent 2 decades building his criminal empire before recruiting the son he'd pretended didn't exist. Why wouldn't he tell me? Because acknowledging you as his son would make you human, and he needed you to be a tool. Because admitting he abandoned you would open him to questions about loyalty and character. Because keeping you desperate for his approval made you more useful than giving you the truth." Seongjin collapsed into the nearest chair, no grace or control, just the complete failure of the strings that had been holding him upright. He put his face in his hands, and Xiomara watched him break. Watched this man who'd killed 43 people fall apart in her living room, and she sipped her bourbon and waited, because everything had to shatter before it could be rebuilt into something stronger. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but dry, and she recognized that look had seen it in her own mirror, often enough to know what it meant. It was the look of someone who'd just watched their entire world burn and was trying to decide whether to walk into the ashes or away from them. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and his voice had gone hoarse. "I want you to kill him," she said simply. No softness, no cushioning, just the plain truth of it. "I want you to prove you're finished with the man who shaped you into a weapon. I want you to show me you're ready to become something else." "I can't." "Yes, you can." Seongjin started, then stopped, reaching for words that wouldn't come, for language that could explain 29 years of abandonment and manipulation and need. "He's all I have." "No," Xiomara said, setting down her glass, the city spreading out behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights marking lives that had no idea what was happening in this room. "He's all you had. Now you have a choice, and that's more than most people ever get." She walked to the door of his room, opened it so he could see inside. Clean clothes, expensive weapons, a laptop with access to her encrypted networks, everything he'd need to become whoever he decided to be next. "Sleep on it," she said. "Decide in the morning. If you choose him, if you still believe he deserves your loyalty after everything I've shown you, I'll let you walk out of here. But you won't make it 3 blocks before someone loyal to me puts you down because I can't let you run back to Che carrying everything you learned tonight." She turned to leave, paused at the threshold. "And Seongjin, when you decide, and you will kill him because we both know you will, don't make it clean. Make him feel it. Men like him need to understand at the end what it costs to discard people." She left him there in the dark with his choices and went to her own room, poured another bourbon, stood at her window, looking out at Seoul's endless electric sprawl. Her phone buzzed with messages from Khalon, her cousin demanding to know what she was doing, why she'd kept the assassin alive, whether she'd lost her mind. She ignored them all. Khalon had been questioning her decisions for 3 years now, ever since Busan, ever since Jinwoo died and the careful architecture of her life had collapsed into rubble and grief. She touched the locket at her throat, opened it, looked at the photograph inside. Jinwoo smiled back at her, frozen at 32, forever young while she aged without him. Behind the photo was the note he'd written the morning they left for Busan. 3 words in his precise handwriting. Trust no one. She hadn't. Not for 5 years. Not since she'd found him in that warehouse with a bullet in the back of his head. Since she'd held him while he was still warm and felt their baby, their 3-month secret, die inside her 2 days later from shock and stress and the simple fact that her body had given up on creating life in a world that kept taking it away. Trust no one, Jinwoo had written, and she'd built her entire existence around that principle, had turned herself into something cold and hard and untouchable, had survived by staying 3 moves ahead of everyone who wanted her dead or broken or gone. And now she was trusting a man who'd been sent to kill her, was gambling everything on the hope that damage recognized damage, that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger than what they'd been before. She closed the locket, finished the bourbon, tried to sleep, and failed the way she failed most nights. The dead didn't care about business hours, didn't respect the boundary between waking and dreams. Jinwoo came to visit around 3 in the morning the way he always did, stood exactly where Seongjin would stand weeks later, asked the same question he asked every night. "Why didn't you die with me?" "Because I tried," she told his ghost. "Because surviving was the punishment, not the reward." He faded the way he always did, unsatisfied, unforgiving, and she was alone again with the city, and her choices and the knowledge that she'd set something in motion tonight that would either save her or destroy whatever was left of the person she used to be. The parking garage beneath the Grand Hyatt smelled like concrete and exhaust and the particular kind of emptiness that 3 in the morning brings to spaces meant for daylight. Seongjin had been waiting for 47 minutes, counting his heartbeats, feeling the weight of the knife against his ribs. Not a gun, Xiomara had been right about that. This needed to be personal, needed to be close enough to see his eyes when it happened. Director Che, his handler, his father, The man who'd saved him and used him and lied to him for 29 years, stepped out of the elevator checking his phone, completely unaware. He kept a mistress on the 18th floor, had for 3 years, paid for it monthly, like utilities. Seongjin had learned this from Xiomara's files, had learned so many things in the 6 days since the nightclub, had felt his entire understanding of his life being rewritten in someone else's handwriting. He moved from the shadows, and Che looked up and smiled. The warm smile he reserved for his best asset, his most reliable tool. Seongjin, I heard about the failed contract. Don't worry, we'll find you another opportunity to prove yourself. The knife went into his stomach just below the ribs, angled up the way Che himself had taught him when Seongjin was 16 and still believed killing could be righteous. How to make it hurt, how to make it last, how to make sure they understood what was happening to them. Che's eyes went wide, the phone clattering from his hand. What? What are you? I know, Seongjin said quietly, holding him upright, walking him backward toward a concrete pillar where the security cameras had a convenient blind spot. Another thing he'd learned from the man currently bleeding on his hands. I know you sent me to die. I know you took money to eliminate me. I know you're my father. The color drained from Che's face faster than the blood draining into his abdominal cavity. Who told you that? Who could possibly? Does it matter? Seongjin twisted the knife, watched his father's face contort, felt nothing. You left my mother when she got pregnant. Told her you had bigger plans than being trapped in Busan with a family. Built your empire and then came back for the son you'd abandoned, but only because a disposable asset with no official ties was useful to you. Seongjin, listen. I was protecting you. If people knew you were my son, they'd use you against me. You're lying, Seongjin said, pulling the knife free and stabbing again, lower this time, into the gut where the pain would scream. You kept me secret because acknowledging me would make you look weak, because fathers are supposed to love their sons and you needed me hollow. I did love, Che started to say, but Seongjin cut him off with another thrust of the blade, opening the abdomen, destroying organs, making sure there was no coming back from this. You loved what I could do for you, Seongjin said, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle, like he was explaining something to a child. You loved having a weapon nobody could trace back to you. You loved controlling me. Please, Che whispered, blood on his lips now, his legs giving out so that only Seongjin's grip on his jacket kept him upright. Please, son. The word landed like a physical blow, but Seongjin didn't stop, couldn't stop. 29 years of abandonment and manipulation, and carefully engineered damage pouring out through his hands. He stabbed again and again, not frenzied, but methodical, the same way he'd been taught to dismantle targets, to make sure the job was complete. When Che finally went limp, dead or close enough that the distinction didn't matter, Seongjin let him fall. The body hit concrete with a wet sound, and he stood over it, over his father's corpse, and waited to feel something. Grief, relief, regret, anything. His phone buzzed. Xiomara asking a question she already knew the answer to. It's done? He typed back with bloody fingers. It's done. How do you feel? Seongjin looked at his hands, at the blood cooling to black under fluorescent lights, at the body of the only father he'd ever known lying in a spreading pool of red. He thought about lying, about saying he felt nothing, about maintaining the fiction that he was still the hollow weapon Che had built. Free, he typed instead. I feel free. The helicopter came 19 minutes later, Xiomara's private medical team ready to sanitize the scene, to make it look like a gang killing, to erase Seongjin's presence from every camera and surface and witness. He watched them work with professional efficiency and understood that this was what Xiomara's world looked like, that she had the resources to disappear murders, to rewrite reality, to make inconvenient truths simply cease to exist. She was waiting when he got back to the penthouse, still awake at 4 a.m, standing at her window with a glass of bourbon and the city spread out behind her like a circuit board. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand details, just looked at him, with those dark eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. "It's done," he said again, because he needed to hear it out loud, needed to make it real. "I know," she said. "My people confirmed cleanup was successful. As far as anyone will ever know, Director Che was killed by rival syndicate members over a territorial dispute. Your name will never come up." "Good," he said, but his hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. "That's good. Come here," Xiomara said, and it wasn't quite an order and wasn't quite an invitation, something in between. He crossed to her, and she handed him the bourbon, and he drank. The burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the burn in his chest. "You did the right thing," she said. "Did I?" He looked at his hands again, half expecting to still see blood even though he'd scrubbed them raw. "He was my father." "He was your abuser," Xiomara corrected. "Biology doesn't make someone a parent any more than owning a gun makes someone a soldier. He abandoned you, manipulated you, tried to have you killed. You ended a threat. That's all." "It doesn't feel like all." "No," she agreed. "It never does." They stood there in silence, the city humming below them, two people who'd killed for survival trying to convince themselves that survival was enough. Seongjin felt the enormity of what he'd done settling onto his shoulders like a weight he'd carry forever, and part of him wanted to ask Xiomara if it got easier, if the ghosts eventually stopped visiting, if there would ever be a night when he slept without seeing Che's face. But he already knew the answer. He could see it in the way she touched her locket, in the shadows under her eyes, in the careful distance she maintained from everything except control. "Tell me about him," Seongjin said, gesturing to the locket. "Tell me about whoever taught you that love isn't worth the cost." Xiomara's hand stilled on the silver pendant, and for a moment he thought she'd refuse, thought she'd retreat behind the walls she'd built so carefully. But then she opened it, showed him the photograph inside, a Korean man in his 30s, with kind eyes and a smile that suggested he'd believed the world was better than it was. "His name was Jinwoo," she said. "I met him 6 years ago in Bangkok. He was an arms dealer, same as me, and we despised each other immediately. I thought he was a criminal pretending at legitimacy. He thought I was a privileged princess playing at business. We spent 3 days negotiating a simple deal because neither of us would bend. What changed? He realized I was smarter than him," she said, and there was something almost like warmth in her voice. An echo of whoever she'd been before grief hollowed her out. "Most men can't stand being outplayed by a woman. Jinwoo loved it. Said he'd been waiting his whole life to meet someone who could match him. Offered me a real partnership, equal split, genuine respect. And you said yes." "I said yes because I was tired of being alone, because I saw myself in him, because for the first time in my life someone was offering me partnership instead of trying to own me." She took the bourbon back, drank. "We built an empire together. Seoul, Busan, expansion into Tokyo and Hong Kong and Manila. We were unstoppable. What happened?" "Busan happened, 5 years ago. We went to meet a North Korean defector who claimed he could provide access to military-grade explosives, the kind of inventory that would have secured us for a decade. We brought our best people, including my cousin Khalon." She paused, and Seongjin saw her hand tighten on the glass. "Someone we trusted sold us to the Korean National Intelligence Service. They hit you during the exchange." "They hit us during the exchange," Xiomara confirmed. "Jinwoo and I got separated in the chaos. I heard him on the comms, heard him calling my name, and then I heard gunfire, and then nothing at all. I found him 20 minutes later in a warehouse by the docks, single shot, back of the head, execution style. He was still warm when I held him." Seongjin didn't know what to say to that. What words could possibly address that kind of loss? So he just moved closer, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone even if neither of them knew what to do with that fact. "I was pregnant," Xiomara said quietly, still looking out at the city, still not meeting his eyes. 3 months. Only Jinwoo knew. We were going to announce it after the Busan deal. I lost the baby 2 days later from the shock, from the stress, from the fact that my body just gave up. "I'm sorry," Seongjin said, and meant it, felt it in his chest, like a physical ache. "Everyone says that," she replied. "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. Sorry doesn't tell me who betrayed us. Sorry doesn't fix the fact that I've spent 5 years building walls so high I forgot what it felt like to let someone in. You let me in." "Did I?" She finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Or did you force your way in and refuse to leave even when I gave you every reason to run?" "Maybe both," he said. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken people trying to figure out if broken things could fit together, or if they'd just create new damage. Then Xiomara set down the bourbon, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted like grief and bourbon and the particular flavor of loneliness that comes from surviving when you should have died. Seongjin kissed her back with the hunger of someone who'd been starving without knowing it, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer, needing the proof that he was still human enough to want something other than violence. They made it as far as the living room floor, before clothes became obstacles to be eliminated. Xiomara's dress pooled like blood around them, his shirt torn and discarded, two bodies trying to prove to each other that they were still capable of feeling something other than pain. It was urgent and rough and tender all at once, hands grasping and gentle, mouths hungry and careful, the contradiction of people who'd learned that everything good could be taken away, but couldn't quite stop themselves from reaching for it anyway. After, lying tangled together with the city lights painting geometric patterns across their skin, Seongjin traced the scars on her ribs, the ones she'd gotten in Busan when she'd hidden in a shipping container while Jinwoo died 50 meters away. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" "Regret implies I had a choice," Xiomara said, her fingers mapping the scar tissue on his chest, the evidence of 13 years as Che's weapon. "I regret that I didn't see the betrayal coming. I regret that I survived when Jinwoo didn't. I regret that my body couldn't hold on to our baby long enough for me to meet them. But I don't regret loving him. That was the only real thing in my life. And now? Now, I don't know what this is," she admitted, gesturing between them. "I don't know if it's real, or if we're both just so damaged that we're clinging to the first person who understands. I don't know if I'm capable of loving someone again, or if I'm just going through motions I remember from before everything broke. We could find out," Seongjin offered. "Or we could ruin each other," Xiomara countered. "I ruin everything I touch eventually. It's a gift." "You haven't ruined me yet. Give it time," she said. But there was something almost like hope in her voice, barely visible beneath the armor but present enough that he could see it. He pulled her closer, felt her heartbeat against his chest, steady and strong, and proof that she was here, real, alive, despite everything that had tried to kill her. "I've got 6 months," he said. "Might as well spend them finding out." She laughed, and it was the first real laugh he'd heard from her, unguarded and genuine, and worth more than the 6,000,000 she was paying him. "Might as well," she agreed, and kissed him again, slower this time, with the particular tenderness of people who knew exactly how fragile everything was and chose to be gentle anyway. They fell asleep on the floor as the sun started rising over Seoul. Two weapons learning to be human again, two people who'd survived by staying alone trying to figure out if survival was enough or if they were brave enough to want more. 3 weeks later, Xiomara was watching Seongjin move through the underground casino in Incheon and thinking that if this went wrong, if her plan failed and he died and she was alone again, she might actually burn the entire city down. The thought should have scared her, but instead, it felt almost comforting. The knowledge that she was capable of feeling something that intense again, that the 5 years of careful numbness were cracking. The casino occupied 3 floors beneath a legitimate hotel, all red velvet and cigarette smoke, and the soft click of chips changing hands. She'd chosen it carefully because the owner owed her considerable favors, because she had access to every security feed, because she could shape the environment in ways that would look accidental until it was too late. Seongjin, he carried a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, supposedly containing classified military intelligence worth millions to the right buyers, actually containing 40 pounds of blank paper and a tracking device. But the buyers didn't need to know that. Xiomara watched from the security office on 6 monitors, different angles showing the main floor in high definition. Beside her, Khalon managed communications, his fingers moving across keyboards, his voice calm in her earpiece as he coordinated their people. "He's moving well," Khalon observed, watching Seongjin work the room with easy confidence, almost like he's actually done this before. "He has," Xiomara said. "Just usually from the other side of the transaction." "You really trust him, cousin?" There was something in Khalon's voice, an edge she couldn't quite identify but registered anyway. "After everything with Jinwoo, after Busan, you're trusting a man who was sent to kill you?" "I'm trusting that he wants Che's people dead as much as I want my betrayer dead," Xiomara replied, not taking her eyes off the screens. "Enemy of my enemy, all that. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting." The buyers arrived in carefully staggered intervals. Chinese triad representatives, sharp suits and sharper eyes, Yakuza from Fukuoka, traditional tattoos visible at collar and cuff, even a team from the Russian consulate, pretending they weren't FSB, fooling absolutely no one. Seongjin played them all perfectly, revealing just enough to keep them interested, withholding enough to drive the price higher. Khalon's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, frowned. "Cousin, I need to step out for a moment. There's an issue with the Taipei shipment that needs immediate attention." "Now?" Xiomara finally looked at him. "We're in the middle of an operation." 5 minutes, he promised. 10 at most. "You have eyes on everything, and the team knows their positions." "Fine," she said. "Go." He left, and later, much later, she would dissect this moment in her mind, would catalog every micro-expression and hesitation, would identify all the warning signs she'd ignored because blood was supposed to mean something, because family was supposed to be the one thing you could trust when everything else failed. On the monitors, a new player entered the casino floor. Late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of military bearing that never fully disappeared no matter how many years you spent in civilian clothes. Seongjin's body language changed minutely, shoulders tightening by maybe 2 degrees, and Xiomara leaned forward. "Who is that?" she said into her comms. "Running facial recognition now," her tech specialist replied, his voice tight with concentration. "Got him. Lee Taeo, former National Intelligence Service, currently freelance consultant. Known associations with..." There was a pause that lasted 1 heartbeat too long, with the Baiko Syndicate and... Another pause. He was flagged in the investigation of the Busan incident 5 years ago, but never formally charged. The world went very quiet and very slow. The Busan incident meant Jinwoo's murder meant someone had just walked into her carefully constructed trap who'd been present at the worst moment of her life. Tayo had been investigated, had somehow walked away clean, had disappeared into the freelance intelligence community where morality was negotiable and loyalty went to the highest bidder. And he was here, now, at an operation only 7 people knew about. Which meant one of those 7 people had told him. Xiomara was moving before she'd fully processed the thought. Out of the security office, through the service corridors, her hand on the pistol concealed beneath her jacket. She hit the casino floor just as Khalon reappeared from the opposite entrance, his timing so perfect, it could only be choreographed. Everything happened very fast. Khalon crossed the floor towards Seongjin, his hand emerging from his jacket, weapon rising with professional smoothness. The room recalibrated instantly. Civilians diving for cover, her mercenaries drawing down, Seongjin pivoting to face the threat with the fluid economy of someone who'd survived 13 years by never being surprised. But Khalon's gun wasn't pointed at Seongjin. It was pointed directly at Xiomara's center mass. "Cousin," he said, and his voice carried across the sudden silence with the particular clarity that comes in moments before violence. "I really wish you'd left well enough alone." The betrayal she'd suspected for 3 years, the suspicion she'd buried because he was family, because he was all she had left after Busan, crystallized into absolute certainty. The pain of it was almost physical, like something vital being torn out of her chest. "You," she said, and her voice came out surprisingly steady. It was always you. "Did you really think I'd let you throw away our family's legacy for a Korean arms dealer?" Khalon's face was calm, almost peaceful, like he'd been waiting 3 years to have this conversation. "You were supposed to come home after Jinwoo died, return to Uganda, take your place, ruling our grandfather's territory. Instead, you stayed here, playing crime lord in a country that will never see you as anything but foreign." "Jinwoo," Xiomara said, and she could feel Seongjin moving into position to her left, could sense her mercenaries calculating angles and odds and acceptable losses. "You killed Jinwoo." "I freed you," Khalon corrected, and there was genuine conviction in his voice, the certainty of someone who'd spent years justifying the unjustifiable. "I gave you every chance to come home, to grieve properly, to remember who you really are. But you stayed, you rebuilt, you replaced our birthright with Korean money and bulletproof glass. Here's a question that matters, and I want you to really think about your answer. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you considered family? Someone whose blood you shared or whose loyalty you'd never questioned? Drop that answer in the comments, because what happens next depends on whether you understand that specific kind of knife, the one that cuts deeper because it comes from someone who was never supposed to hurt you. Lee Tae-yo moved to stand beside Khalon, and the pieces were falling into place now, the architecture of the betrayal revealing itself in real time. "You've been working together," Xiomara said. "For how long?" 3 years, Khalon confirmed. "Since I realized you were never coming home, that you'd chosen this life over our family, over everything grandfather built. Tayo has been very helpful, feeding me information about your operations, helping me understand your security, waiting for the right moment to dismantle everything you've built." "And Seongjin?" She kept her voice level even though rage was building in her chest like pressure. "Where does he fit into your plan?" Khalon smiled, and it was the ugliest expression she'd ever seen on his face. On the face of the cousin who'd taught her to ride a bike when she was 7, who'd held her hand at their grandfather's funeral, who'd been the one constant in a life defined by instability. "He's been reporting to me since the nightclub," Khalon said. "Every conversation, every vulnerability, every moment you let your guard down. Did you really think I'd let you keep a trained killer without controlling him?" The words hit like bullets, and Xiomara looked at Seongjin, searching his face for confirmation or denial, needing to know if the last 3 weeks had been real or just another performance. "Say it's not true," she said, and hated how broken she sounded, hated that Khalon was hearing this, was seeing her crack. "Seongjin," Khalon called, his voice carrying command. Tell her how you reported when she told you about Jinwoo, about the baby, about every weakness she foolishly trusted you with." The casino held its breath. Seongjin's hand moved toward his weapon and Xiomara's world contracted to a single point, to the question of whether the man she'd started to love was about to kill her or save her, whether she'd been right to trust him or if she'd just made the same mistake twice. He spun and put 3 rounds into Taeyo's chest before anyone could react. The former intelligence officer staggered backward, blood blooming across his expensive shirt, his own weapon only halfway drawn. He hit the floor and didn't get up. "Every word I told your cousin was scripted," Seongjin said, appearing at Xiomara's shoulder, covering her 6 with his body. "Everything she told me to say, you were testing him, remember?" She did remember. The night on the balcony that hadn't been as unguarded as it seemed. The careful revelations designed to travel through the bug she'd planted in her own penthouse. The whispered confessions she'd known Khalon could access if he was monitoring her the way she suspected. A trap within a trap within a trap. "I could kiss you," she said, putting 2 rounds into a triad soldier who'd decided this chaos was his opportunity to eliminate competition. "Later," Seongjin replied, returning fire at one of Khalon's people who'd broken cover too soon. "After, we don't die." They moved through the casino like a single organism, covering each other's angles, advancing and retreating in perfect synchronization. Xiomara's mercenaries pushed forward, driving Khalon's people back, but her cousin was slippery, always had been, using the crowd as cover, firing carefully to avoid civilian casualties because even now he maintained the fiction that he had principles. He was fighting toward the service exit, toward the tunnels that connected to the subway system, toward escape. Xiomara wanted to chase him, wanted to end this here and now, wanted to put a bullet in him and watch him bleed out while she told him exactly what she thought of his justifications and his righteousness and his betrayal. Seongjin caught her arm. "Let him go. We know who he is now. He's got nowhere left to hide." "He killed Jinwoo," she said, and her voice was shaking with rage. "He killed my husband, my baby. He's been next to me for 5 years watching me suffer and probably enjoying every second." "Which is why we find him properly," Seongjin said, his eyes locked on hers. "And make him pay for all of it, but not like this, not in chaos where he might escape or take you with him. Deliberately, carefully, the way he deserves." Sirens were approaching, their window closing. Xiomara forced herself to think tactically instead of emotionally, to be the woman who'd built an empire instead of the one who'd lost everything in Busan. She nodded once, and they moved toward their own exit, leaving Teo's body and 3 of Khalon's mercenaries bleeding on expensive carpet. Her people would sanitize what they could, would feed the right story to the right authorities, would make sure this looked like a gang dispute over territory instead of what it really was. But Khalon was gone, disappeared into Seoul's underground, and the war between them had just gone from covert to open. The safe house in Jeju Island was one Khalon didn't know about, purchased 2 years ago through so many shell companies that even Xiomara sometimes forgot the exact ownership structure. It was small, 3 rooms and a deck facing the ocean, far enough from the city that the stars actually showed themselves at night. She'd bought it thinking she might retire here someday, might finally get tired of the violence and the paranoia and the careful dance of survival. Now it was just another place to hide while she hunted her cousin. Seongjin found her on the deck at 2 in the morning, staring at the ocean like it held answers. She didn't turn when he approached, didn't acknowledge his presence until he was close enough to touch. "He'll reach out," Seongjin said. "He'll want the last word, want to justify himself one more time." "I know," she replied. "He's always needed to win the argument, to be right, to have his actions validated even when they're indefensible." "What will you do when we find him?" She was quiet for a long time, listening to the waves, feeling the weight of 5 years pressing down on her shoulders. Then, "I don't know. He's blood, he's family. In my culture, that's supposed to mean something sacred. Killing him means admitting that family can be poison, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or love or anything except shared DNA. Family can absolutely be poison," Seongjin said, thinking of Che. Thinking of his father who'd abandoned him and used him and tried to have him killed. Biology doesn't make people good. It just makes the betrayal hurt more when they show you who they really are. She turned to look at him then, really look, studying his face in the moonlight. "When did you become so wise?" "When I met a woman who taught me that survival isn't the same as living," he said. "That sometimes you have to burn down everything you were to become what you need to be." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, pulling him down to the deck, needing the proof of his presence, the reality of his body against hers. They made love under the stars, with the ocean providing percussion. 2 broken people trying to convince themselves that broken things could still create something whole. After, lying tangled together with the salt air cooling their skin, she told him the rest, about how she'd known for only 2 weeks that she was pregnant before Busan, about how she'd been planning to tell Jinwoo that night after the deal, about the miscarriage that had felt like her body punishing her for surviving when he didn't. "I thought I'd never let anyone close again," she whispered against his chest. "Thought I'd just be this ghost moving through the world, making money and making deals and never making connections that could hurt me. And then you refused to die when you were supposed to. Refused to stay just a weapon. Refused to let me keep you at distance. Sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Don't be, she replied. You're the first thing in 5 years that's felt like living, instead of just refusing to die. The message came 5 days later. Video file, untraceable number, encrypted well enough that it took her best hacker 6 hours to crack it. Xiomara played it on the secure laptop with Seongjin beside her, both of them tense, both of them ready for whatever fresh manipulation Khalon had prepared. His face filled the screen and he looked exhausted, older than his 34 years, a man who'd burned everything and was only now realizing what the smoke smelled like. "Cousin," he started. And even now there was that self-righteous tone, that certainty that he was the wronged party. "You've always been stubborn. It's what made you good at business but terrible at family. You can't see that everything I did because I loved you." Xiomara's hand clenched into a fist. "You want revenge. You want blood. Fine," Khalon continued. "Tomorrow night, the warehouse district in Incheon, Pier 7. Come alone and we'll settle this the old way, the way grandfather would have wanted. Blood debt paid in blood." He paused, and something vicious crossed his face. "Or I kill that assassin's mother, the sweet woman in Busan who makes soup for her neighbors and thinks her son works in private security. I've had people watching her since you captured him. Would be such a shame if something happened to her because you couldn't follow simple instructions." The video ended. Seongjin had gone very pale. "He's bluffing. He has to be bluffing." "Is he?" Xiomara pulled up surveillance footage her people had obtained, showed him Khalon's mercenaries watching his mother's apartment, following her to the market, documenting her routine with the thoroughness of people preparing for violence. "We go together," Seongjin said immediately. "Full team. Overwhelming force. We end this tonight." "He'll kill her the second he sees anyone but me," Xiomara replied. "This is classic Khalon. One last manipulation. One last chance to control the situation by threatening something I care about. You." "What?" "He's threatening something you care about," Seongjin said. "Me, my mother, us. He's figured out that you're not alone anymore and he hates it. So what do? "We give him exactly what he wants," Xiomara said, and began checking her weapons. "I go alone, you're already in position with our people, and when he makes his move, we end him." "You're sure he won't come alone?" "I'm certain he won't come alone," she said. "He's paranoid and he's losing, and desperate people make mistakes. We just have to make sure his mistake is fatal." The warehouse in Incheon smelled like salt and rust. Vast, empty space that had once held shipping containers full of weapons, full of the inventory that had made her and Jinwoo rich and powerful and targets. Xiomara walked in alone, her footsteps echoing, her heart steady despite everything. Khalon waited in the center under a shaft of moonlight from broken skylights, and he looked smaller than she remembered, diminished. Or maybe she'd just outgrown the childhood worship that had made him seem larger than life. "You came," he said. "You threatened an innocent woman," she replied. "Of course I came." "Innocent?" He laughed bitterly. "She raised the man who chose you over his own culture, over his own people. That doesn't seem innocent to me." "This is between us," Xiomara said. "Blood to blood, like you wanted." "Blood to blood," he echoed, and pulled his weapon. "Do you know why I really did it? Why I really killed Jinwoo? You told me already. Family, legacy, tradition, all your rationalizations about how I was abandoning my heritage." "I lied," Khalon said, and his voice cracked. "I've been lying for 6 years, pretending it was about family honor when really, it was just—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I loved you, cousin. Since we were 16, since grandfather sent you to Seoul and I followed like a loyal dog, I loved you and you never saw me, not the way I needed you to." The confession hit like cold water, recontextualizing 6 years of interactions, and Xiomara felt something like horror mixing with understanding. "Khalon, we're cousins. We could never." "I know," he said, and there were tears on his face now. Don't you think I know? That's what made it worse. Loving you was wrong and inevitable, and watching you fall in love with Jinwoo killed me a little more every single day. So you killed him. So I killed him, Khalon confirmed. Stood in that warehouse in Busan and put a bullet in his head and watched him die. And you want to know the worst part? He didn't beg for his life. He begged for yours. Please not, Xiomara. Please let her live. Like you were the only thing in the world that mattered to him. Stop, Xiomara said, because hearing it was like living it again. And I let you live because even hating you for loving him, even wanting to punish you for not choosing me, I couldn't kill you, Khalon said. So I settled for making you suffer, for watching you grieve, for hoping that maybe eventually you'd need me the way I needed you. You killed my baby, Xiomara said, her voice shaking. Jinwoo's death, the stress of it, made me lose our child. You took everything from me because I wouldn't love you the way you wanted. I know, Khalon whispered. I know, and I'm sorry, and I'm not sorry, and I can't stand watching you be happy with someone else. I can't do it again. His gun came up, aimed at her heart. So it ends here, cousin. If I can't have you, nobody gets to have you. The shot that cracked through the warehouse didn't come from Khalon's weapon. He staggered, blood blooming on his shoulder, weapon clattering to concrete. Seongjin emerged from the shadows with a rifle, followed by her mercenaries flowing from concealed positions like water finding cracks. You really thought I'd come alone, Xiomara said quietly, walking toward her cousin. You really thought I'd make the same mistake twice. That I'd trust family over strategy after everything you taught me about survival. Khalon laughed, wet and broken, sinking to his knees. Of course not. I raised you better than that. But I had to try. Had to see if maybe this time you'd choose me. Choose blood. She crouched in front of him, close enough to see the grief and obsession and twisted love in his eyes. If you'd told me the truth 6 years ago, if you'd been honest about your feelings instead of letting them poison you, I would have helped you. Got you distance, got you therapy, got you anything except this. Would you have? He coughed, red on his lips. Or would you have been disgusted? Would you have cut me out of your life for feeling something I couldn't control? I guess we'll never know, she said, and stood. Because you chose murder over honesty, chose possession over love. And that's not family, Khalon. That's just obsession wearing family's mask. She pulled her weapon, aimed at his chest. I forgive you for loving me wrong, she said, for being broken and not knowing how to fix it. For the cousin you used to be before this twisted you into something unrecognizable. I forgive you for that. And the rest? His voice was barely a whisper. For murdering my husband? For killing my child? For 5 years of calculated cruelty while pretending to comfort me? She steadied her aim. For that, you die. Cousin, wait, please. My name is Xiomara, she said. And you stopped being my family the moment you put that bullet in Jinwoo's head. She pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through empty space, final and absolute. Khalon fell backward, blood spreading beneath him. And Xiomara felt the 5-year weight lifting from her shoulders. The ghost of Busan finally being laid to rest. Seongjin appeared at her side, took the gun gently from her shaking hand. It's done, he said. She nodded, unable to speak, and let him guide her toward the exit. Behind them, her people moved to sanitize the scene, to create the fiction of a gang dispute, to erase her presence from every surface and camera and witness. Let the family in Uganda mourn their lost prince. Let them never know what he'd become. She was done carrying other people's secrets, done being defined by their damage. 4 months later, Xiomara stood on the deck of the beach house in Jeju Island, watching Seongjin's mother teach her how to make kimchi the traditional way, listening to the older woman's laughter mixing with the sound of the ocean. She'd sold most of her operations, kept only the legitimate security consulting that paid obscene amounts for her expertise in threat assessment and risk mitigation. Turned out you could make excellent money without constantly looking over your shoulder for assassins. Seongjin emerged from the house with coffee, handed her a cup, settled beside her with the easy comfort of someone who'd earned the right to occupy her space. His mother glanced over and smiled, said something in Korean that Xiomara was slowly learning to understand. Something about how good it was to see her son happy. "What are you thinking about?" Seongjin asked, after his mother had gone back inside. "That I spent 5 years thinking I was hunting Khalon when really I was running from the possibility of being happy again," Xiomara said. "Running from the guilt of surviving, from the fear that loving someone new meant betraying Jinwoo's memory. And now? Now I think Jinwoo would want me to actually live, instead of just exist in the space between his death and mine," she said. "I think he'd like you, actually. Would appreciate that you're smart enough to challenge me and stubborn enough to not let me push you away." "I'm extremely stubborn," Seongjin agreed, kissing her temple. "It's one of my best features." She turned to look at him. This man who'd been sent to kill her and had instead become her salvation, her partner, her proof that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger than the original. If this story stayed with you, if Xiomara and Seongjin's journey from weapons to human beings meant something, consider subscribing for more stories that dig into the complicated truth of healing after damage, of building after destruction, of choosing love when survival seems safer. More stories coming soon. Thank you for being here.